Welcome, guys, to episode 163 of Radio 815, the podcast dedicated to examining the work of writer director J.J. Abrams, as well as his greater Bad Robot universe. I'm your host for this time around. My name is Marcelo Inostroza, joined as always by my fellow co-host, Matt Crandall. And on today's edition of the show, we will be discussing the 2010 film entitled Morning Glory, produced by our very own J.J. Abrams. So, Matt, I have a question for you. Can you please just say the word fluffy one time? That's all I'm asking. Just once. Say it once.
And it is funny to watch Harrison Ford in a very dramatic scene look right at the camera and have to begrudgingly go, fluffy. And you're like, okay, this is why this thing was made. So I remember, Morning Glory being a Bad Robot project was kind of strange, because we're talking about it today because it is full on produced by J.J. Abrams and Brian Burke. It was supposed to come out from Paramount in the summer of 2010, and they pushed it to the fall, to November. And it doesn't have a lot of Bad Robot alums in the cast. In fact, almost none, but not quite none. It doesn't have very many Bad Robot alums in the creative talent pool. It's written by Aline Brosh McKenna, who wrote Devil Wears Prada, 27 Dresses, and then this. She would go on to be the co-creator, main showrunner of Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, which was a very popular, musical comedy. And she also is frequently on the podcast Script Notes with Craig Mazin and John August, and she often comes on to talk about her work. But she wrote this based on an idea of an old Neil Simon thing, and somehow, then JJ and her developed it further. But it's strange because, she hadn't had Bad Robot ties before this movie. It's directed by Roger Mitchell, who is a weird director. He made an all-time classic in 1999's Notting Hill, which, Hugh Grant, Julia Roberts, one of the best rom-coms, hilarious British film that they always put a new spin on in some way. So that was, world famous movie star falls in love with regular guy. And even, this year we got a movie where Anne Hathaway is regular girl who falls in love with a big pop star. So they always use that formula again. But then he made Changing Lanes with Ben Affleck and Samuel L. Jackson, and a bunch of quiet movies, until Morning Glory is kind of his return to form on paper. But he's not a visionary visual stylist. And so for him to step in here is just kind of weird for me. I wonder why we didn't get, a Bad Robot person to come in and maybe helm this thing. But again, this was Bad Robot trying to branch out, because this is when they're making Mission, they're making Star Trek, and they're like, let's do a rom-com, not that much rom, but just kind of a comedy with a little bit of romance. Let's do a James L. Brooks broadcast news working girl type of movie to branch out and see if we can start producing stuff that's not genre. And I don't know that necessarily, obviously it didn't catch on because this didn't make very much money, but it's not a bad movie. It's just a perfectly fine, okay kind of movie.
Yeah, to move to your point, as I was watching this movie, I kept trying to think of reasons why they would do this movie. I believe that the only reason that they did this movie is because of a contractual reason. Because as you said, at this time they were doing Mission and they had Star Trek on the go. But if you recall, when JJ initially signed his deal with Paramount, he was supposed to direct an X amount of number of films for Paramount, but he ended up only doing the first two Star Trek films and Mission Impossible. But I don't know if that was under his deal. I don't know if that was before or after, but I do think that the main reason that Bad Robot did this is because they had to, because Paramount was asking them for something, and they somehow JJ came upon this, like you said, and decided to produce it. For a director for this film, I was thinking maybe Lawrence Trilling or something like that. Since you suggested it should have been a Bad Robot guy, I was like, He probably would have done an interesting job with this movie. He would have probably brought some life to it from a directing standpoint, because from a directing standpoint, it was a little flat. There wasn't much to it. This movie had a TV move. Well, that's lowballing it, but I'm going to tell you the truth. This movie had a TV movie of the week look to it. And I was like, if they would have got like a Bad Robot guy, or if they would have took a director from the Bad Robot stable, perhaps the visual language of this movie would have looked a little bit more inviting and intriguing to the people that were watching it.
Yeah, and there's just like a few. It's very standard. So like there's not much visual flair. And the one thing that they do try at the beginning doesn't work, which is we get the Paramount logo, we get the Bad Robot logo. And you know that the Bad Robot logo says Bad Robot at the bottom. It has the picture of the robot in the wheat or whatever. And it is taking up like only maybe a quarter of the frame right in the middle. And so then our first shot actually only fills up a quarter of the frame right in the middle where only the Bad Robot had been. And then slowly over the course of this 3-minute introductory scene, the frame slowly starts to build out. And it is kind of trying to reflect like a TV screen size to then going to like movie size, but it's so slow that for the first minute and a half, you're like, why are they filming this in this fucked up aspect ratio? And then you're like, oh, the frame is slightly enlarging. And like it's slightly enlarging until then it finally fills up the full 2.35 to 1, scope aspect ratio that we were expecting a movie to look like. But I'm like, what a bizarre choice. It would be one thing if you started there and 10 seconds later the frame opens up as if it was a camera move into the space. But like literally it's multiple shots and it's so slow that I was like, what the fuck? It was so distracting that like it really bothered me. But this scene, which is Rachel McAdams, on a first date, and she plays, this is Rachel McAdams at the height of her cuteness. Like she's so cute and adorable. And so you want a character like this who's charming. And as we see throughout this whole movie, Becky is plucky as hell. So like every challenge that comes her way, she's just facing it with a smile. And so she's very endearing, but we see her on this first date. And this is the only that I clocked Bad Robot alum that she's on a date with, which is this guy, Noah Bean, who was in one episode of Fringe. And I was like, I know this face. And he was an FBI agent on one episode of the early going of Fringe. And, this is the time roughly when he would have probably filmed Fringe in the morning. And then they fucking flew him over to this set and he filmed it the next day or whatever. From there, we learn that she is a morning show producer, which nowadays, there's a couple things with this movie that scream, they made it in 2009, which was when Bad Robot was really firing kind of on all cylinders, because we've had Cloverfield, we've had JJ's Trek. This movie is the movie that comes in between Trek and Super 8. And then, right after Super 8, we got Ghost Protes. So like, this is like Bad Robot, like bang, 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 hit, hit, hit. And this is the one that doesn't hit. But I appreciated that, at the time, they were like, okay, we're going for this James L. Brooks, like feel good, somebody's got a plight. It's not life and death drama. It's not so funny that the comedy is going to have you laughing in the aisles. And it's also not so romantic that, romance fans are going to tune in. So it's very weird because it's a little bit of everything that by the end of it adds up to almost nothing. But the things that work about this movie are they went and for the most part, they got the best cast possible to make this thing very entertaining, because you throw in Jeff Goldblum as a supporting character. So immediately you got my attention. Then you bring in Annie Hall herself, Diane Keaton, who's one of the goats when it comes to this kind of movie. And this is, right after she, in the early 2000s, she did like Something's Gotta Give with Nancy Myers, and like she was back after that. Her and Rachel McAdams starred together in a movie a couple years before this as mother and daughter. So it's kind of fun to see them, a Family Stone reunion. And then of course the big dog, the reason that you make this movie about this curmudgeonly news anchor who has been forced into this job that he doesn't like. And of course, as it goes, he learns a lot of life lessons and softens as a person. But we got Harrison fucking Ford. So it's one of those things where who would have known that years ago, Harrison Ford being in a movie about a dude who is a piece of shit who gets shot and then paints a bunch of pictures of Ritz cracker boxes would then lead to him working again with that guy. And it's because of those movies that Ford agrees to do the Star Wars sequels. The only reason he's in Force Awakens is because he knew JJ and they had worked together on these other movies. And so it's fun to see Ford in this, in a mode, in basically the fuck off, get off my lawn mode for 90% of it. And it does feel like an old fashioned, movie star driven movie that isn't plot heavy, isn't high concept. And even now, this would be a prestige show like they have on Apple, The Morning Show, which does have a lot of similar beats of like one of the main anchors is a sexist piece of shit who gets fired. But of course, now it's like cancel culture. And even watching this, Ty Burrell, who this came out right before he would become, or like right after he was on Modern Family, and Ty Burrell would win tons of Emmys on Modern Family. He would be like America's Dad for 10 years, and he's playing this piece of shit who's on banginggrannies.com, and he gets fired. And it's funny watching this because now we're like, oh yeah, that's like Matt Lauer or whoever who gets fired for all this stuff. So you're like, some of these stories must have been floating around and people knew, but now in the Me Too era, even Harrison Ford wouldn't have lasted with him being such a prick to people now. Like all these people would have been canceled online.
Yeah, I do believe that this film has a style to it. Like Matt said, it's very light and it's very fluffy. And what happens in this film pretty much amounts to nothing. But the thing that I really, really enjoy about the film is watching Rachel McAdams' character, specifically in the beginning of the movie. I really like the way that she is. I really like characters that are dedicated to what they want to do. And the fact that Rachel McAdams' life is dedicated to her job and that she lives and breathes getting up at 1:30, going into work at 5 a.m. to have the pre-meeting that leads to the show. I like characters like that. And the reason why I like characters like that is because it's fun to watch characters like that discover that there's more to life than just doing a job and doing it well. But the other thing that I really like about this movie, and I wish that the writer would have used this story point a little bit more, I really kind of identified with Rachel McAdams, her character's mom, being so disapproving of her life choices, because early on in the film, when she gets fired from her first job that leads her to working with the organization that ends up hiring Harrison Ford as one of the anchors, her mom says, I believe she's like 30 something, and her mom says something to the effect of, okay, you're in your 30s and I think it's really time for you to sit down and look at your life and go in a different direction. And a couple of years ago, I had that conversation with one of my family members, and I took it a lot, and I took it a lot meaner than Rachel McAdams' characters did, because I said, listen, regardless of what you say, I'm an adult and this is the path that I'm going down, and you can't change my mind. This is what I'm doing with my life. Whether you like that or not, that's not my problem. But I really identified with her wanting to prove to other individuals that she was worth it and that she was a go-getter. Even when she gets fired, she gets so many rejection letters from other news organizations, and she keeps calling the same people back again and again and again and again before she gets that meeting with Ian Malcolm or Jeff Goldblum to come and basically save this morning show that's in the shitter because it's awful for some reason. And this could be due to the fact that it's kind of his whole mythos now. I kind of believe that Harrison Ford was not acting in this movie. I thought I was like, this is just the way he is, because this is the way he is kind of now all the time. Because he's like Matt said, he is that guy. He has reached that point in his career where he can show up and be kind of problematic, but get away with it because he's Harrison Ford.
Yeah, it is kind of his persona of, let's shoot this piece of shit as the story goes, where, even on set, he's like, we're all cashing a paycheck, so let's just get paid. And you're like, oh, okay. So I do like that they utilize Harrison Ford really well in this movie. And as you said, it's interesting, but it's a thread that doesn't go anywhere. Her mom being disapproving, and after very sitcom style setup where a girl at work tells her she thinks that you're getting a promotion and they give her a shirt, and then of course she goes into the meeting and gets fired, which, like I said, it's a sitcom setup that you've seen on a million shows before, where somebody hears a rumor that you're getting the job, and if I ever hear a rumor that I'm getting a promotion, I know I'm going to be on the street by the end of the week, so it's funny where her mom is disapproving, and then we never fucking check back in with that mom ever again. There's one shot of her in the movie looking at like the TV and smiling, but that's it. And I'm like, what the fuck? Like, I know that this lady is busy. Becky is busy, but why bother introduce this mother character who's disapproving if we're never going to have the heart to heart later where she's like, you proved me wrong. You did your thing. Like, we just don't have time for it. And it's kind of because that dynamic is very similar to the dynamic with Mike Pomeroy, where it's like a parent and a child seeking the approval of the person who doesn't want to be all in on the thing, right? So it's a very similar dynamic, but obviously a little different. But they're playing on that, don't meet your heroes and what happens when your hero isn't the person you thought they were. And again, when Becky sends out all those resumes, it's pure pluck. She gets that phone call and she's like, I'll take it. They're like, we're not offering you a job. I'll take it. We're not offering you a job. We want you to come in for an interview. I'll be there. And, she's just so plucky that can go the wrong way if you get the wrong person. But Rachel McAdams 100% was the right person. And I like that from there, we see Goldblum, we get kind of scuzzy. This job is probably crap, and they aren't expecting very much from her. She has the meet cute with Patrick Wilson, who I love Patrick Wilson. Like, the dude is just a charming guy. And when you utilize him the right way, which I think this movie really does, because when they meet and they start to like go on, but then she gets so busy with work, I start thinking, oh God, please don't have this be like we have to break up because you're too invested in your work and I can't be with like a workaholic. And like the movie doesn't bother to really go there in a big way. He actually is just cheering her on and like helps her. Even there's a moment where you think like, oh, he's going to be so embarrassed because she gives that big speech that his buddies are watching on the monitor. But the movie doesn't take like those romantic tropes that any other rom-com would have, like the big misunderstanding or this huge moment. So I like that they don't do that. And her and Patrick Wilson have such great chemistry that like, I believe it. She's a bit of a flibbertigibbet and he's kind of this young hotshot, but they got something going on. And I like that aspect that we see that, yes, she is sacrificing a lot of her personal life to try and make this TV show work, but it's not closed off entirely. And like I said, the reason that any of this movie works comes down to casting choices, because also on the morning show side, we don't explore it that much, but the thing that starts to pop is that Diane Keaton and Harrison Ford can't fucking stand each other. And we love that like love-hate dynamic, enemies to lovers or whatever we can almost imagine, even though the movie doesn't quite go that route. But I love that their banter as like he cannot be bothered to engage, but he can still, fire off zingers at will. And seeing those two having these two screen legends who hadn't really worked together before this, barb with each other is where the movie starts to come to life. So there are moments where like entire scenes are really dynamic and really fun, but they're kind of flattened out by a lot of the rest of the movie just being pretty paint by numbers.
I think you're definitely onto something there. I think that this movie has all the ingredients to really swing above its weight, but I really think that the person who wrote this movie and the director, and I'm not going to say the cast because the cast did a brilliant job with what they were given. So I really think that this movie had the potential to be something more than what it was, but I kind of think that the creative behind it, I'm not to say they didn't care, because they obviously cared. I think that they settled, and that's why we didn't see a possible bigger exploration of the Patrick Wilson character, who I love because he works with James Wan a lot. And to move to Matt's point, I loved their dynamic and how accepting he was of the fact that he was dating a woman who was a workaholic. My favorite moment between the two of them is after they sleep together I think it's for the first time. He wakes up and she is not sleeping next to him. As a matter of fact, she's working in his living room. And most romantic comedies, they would use this opportunity to have him get mad and to have that be the break. And we would eventually lead up to them getting back together at the end of the movie. But like Matt indicated, this script isn't concerned with following any of the traditional romantic comedy outline. And what they do instead is he goes, what are you doing? And she goes, oh, nothing, just watching news. And he's like, you really want to get out of here. And I love how she says, oh, no, I want to stay. And he's like, bullshit, you want to get out of here. Just go. I love how he's so understanding of this woman's passion for what they do. But I also love how he's secure enough to understand that if there's something there between the two of them, which obviously there is, it will happen. And to not freak out about something so trivial and to freak out about something so dumb like that would be kind of stupid. And I really liked that the writer didn't go down that road. The one thing that I will say about this movie that I did find quite strange, it said a couple times in the movie that Harrison Ford has grandchildren, right? It said a couple times, I think. And I would have really appreciated it if they would have like shown his grandchildren, or they would have explained why he got fired from the last place he got fired at. Like, is it because he believes in the sanctity of news so much that his previous employer was asking him to do something that he didn't believe in, and that led to his firing? Or what led to the rift between him and his family? That could have given one of the best actors of all time, Harrison Ford, something else to work with, or something a little bit more to work with to flesh out his character a bit.
Absolutely. I think if we had seen that there was some sort of, dynamic behind the scenes where, almost like the movie The Insider, where, there's a dynamic at CBS where one guy wants to run the story and Mike Wallace turns on his producer and says, like, we shouldn't run the story, and it causes a rift. If we had a moment where Harrison Ford is like, we have to run this story, it's important, and we found out that the suits wouldn't let it happen, and then that's what caused him to be fired from that show, and then, caused a rift with him and his child, that then he's estranged from the grandchildren, would be more interesting. Because obviously we're supposed to think that by the end of this movie, when he is finally willing to start embracing where he is at, and he's willing to go on TV and cook some eggs, make a frittata, make a fluffy frittata, shit that he never would have done. We're supposed to think that this is like the start of a ball rolling down the hill, where he is going to realize that mending fences with his family and his grandchildren is important, all because of what Becky has shown him. That, if you start having fun with it and you don't worry about what your life used to be, you won't feel so stuck, right? And so, like, I like that he has an arc and she has an arc, even though her arc, like, she's going to turn down the Today Show, which would definitely pay her, I don't know, 4 times as much money as she's going to continue to make on Daybreak, just because she wants to work with this guy that she respects. Nowadays we would say, bullshit, get the bag, fuck Mike Pomeroy, go take the high paying job. So, like, that's also something that has changed in the, nearly 15 years since this movie. But I like that they both have arcs. But again, like you said, we get these crumbs that show us that Harrison Ford has a backstory and has all these things going on, but we don't dive into them. We just start to see, like, okay, maybe the ice around his heart is starting to melt, and that will turn into something else. But we don't see the something else, and the only problem is that something else could have been more interesting than what we do see in the movie. I do like where, she comes into the job, and in the first meeting, everyone is just shouting at her, and you're like, oh, she's getting overwhelmed. She's not going to be able to handle this. And again, the writer subverts our expectations a little bit, because Becky's got that pluck And she just fucking says, everybody shut up. And then she answers all 15 questions in a row, fires Ty Burrell, and is like, let's go. And they're like, okay, this isn't some idiot producer who's going to get overwhelmed and quit. She's on the ball. So I like that she is good at her job. And it's never actually her fault that the show's not doing well. It's, you know, Mike Pomeroy's. It's these other things that she has to learn how to control and wrangle because she is competent and great at her job. And if you give her time, then she will find out that, you know, throwing Matt Malloy on a roller coaster is going to be the right thing to do. And again, there are moments in this movie where like her right hand is played by John Pankow, who is really famous for being on Mad About You for a lot of years. And you think like, is there going to be a horrible moment where like he's got a family and then he's going to hit on her or something? And no, we don't go down any of those roads. He's just a nice family man who like is there to help her navigate. And I like those moments. And every time Rachel McAdams gets to shine by giving a big monologue or something, she just commands the screen so well that you're like, hell yeah, go get it. Like I'm interested in this character, but there are just some of those spaces between or the fact that it feels like a pilot for a mini series and we don't get the real juicy stuff by the end of it. It's a perfectly fine Sunday afternoon. Throw this on for 2 hours. You're going to have a good time. Then you're not going to think about it for 15 years until you're doing a podcast and you remember, oh yeah, that movie. Or, you know, it'll just randomly pop up in a top 10 list on Netflix. You'll be like, why the fuck is everybody watching Morning Glory all of a sudden? And it's like, well, it just happens to be its time. So I think that's, you know, interesting. It's a perfectly fine movie that doesn't excel at anything. And knowing that this is from the writer of Devil Wears Prada, you can see they wanted to make a movie in that vein where like, you know, young woman gets thrown in with the evil person that they have to melt down and show how to be a real person by the end. And there is a runner in this that I think doesn't quite work, but is showing that this writer was thinking about this, where like every time Rachel McAdams gives a big speech, people look at her and she's like, I'm not going to sing. And they think that she's going to break into song because she's so plucky and it's like she's leading up to a musical number. And of course, like I said, this writer co-created Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, which is that. It is the rom-com that when they do give a big monologue, it does lead into a giant musical song and dance number. So it was funny clocking that because this is a few years before that show would happen. And I was like, okay, this is something this writer was interested in and thinking about even back then.
I love Rachel McAdams. I will always love Rachel McAdams. But the thing that I love about her as an actress, you said it, the way that she does monologues and the way that she sort of psychs herself up like for a big monologue. There's this one moment in the movie where where her and Pomeroy have had a huge disagreement, and she has fucking had it. And during a taping, she walks into the control room and she confronts him and she just basically calls him a fucking ball back to his face. She has this giant freak out. And I love it. While she's having the freak out, the camera person behind her is saying, we're live in 30 seconds. We're live in 15 seconds. And as the countdown is happening, as they're slowly almost about to come out of commercial, she's still going. And Harrison Ford's character, Pomeroy, doesn't say anything. He's just there. He's just taking it. But I love the moment when he goes, we're live now. And she has to sink down so she can get the fuck out of the shot. I absolutely love that. The other thing, there's the moment in this episode where, there's a moment in this movie where she has a big realization. I believe it's when she's having the interview at NBC, where she sees that Pomeroy is willing to do the fluffy pieces, do the things that will make the show popular so they can stay on the air. And her character runs all the way from where she is to her station. I love shots of characters running places.
Yeah, I think, well, that's always fun to see, running around like that. But yeah, I think you've nailed pretty much, like, I don't disagree with any of that. And again, this is a perfectly fine movie. there was confusion over like who it was for, and it's coming shortly after Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. So like Harrison Ford is trying to branch out from, doing other things. And I will say that like some critics really did like the movie, and famously, one of the critics who really did like it was Roger Ebert. And he said, Morning Glory is funny entertainment to begin with, and then Rachel McAdams transforms it. And Harrison Ford transforms himself to bring this kind of energy. And he says it grows from human nature and is about how people do their jobs and live their lives. And it's not, these gigantic stakes, but it's just a perfectly pleasant, entertaining thing. And that, all these years later, is what it is. And that is something that more specifically on TV, Bad Robot really did a lot. Smaller human stories that were about character, but it was just translating that to movie format, which, like I said, now, like there is a show that is this on Apple TV right now. They got movie stars on a morning show, and the show is not good, but they basically are coasting on the charm of the movie stars, which is what this tried to do as well. And it's just, this would now also be either a streaming series or a straight to streaming movie. And so it cost $30 million. I think worldwide it maybe finished at 60, but in North America, like it opened to number 5. So like it wasn't lighting up the box office. It came out at the same time as Robert Downey Jr.'s Zach Galifianakis comedy Due Date. Terrible movie. And Megamind, a DreamWorks animated juggernaut that's also terrible movie. So, that shit kind of happens. But I was happy that Bad Robot tried to do a movie like this, but obviously because it wasn't a huge box office hit, they really haven't tried to do it again. They've left all of that stuff for TV, but I wouldn't mind now seeing them try and do like another adult comedy, like a workplace comedy drama, and try and get like, these movie stars with all the charisma in the world to bring this stuff to life in some way. So, this one, not a classic, but certainly not an embarrassment. It's not The Suburbans. It's not torture. It is perfectly fine and entertaining for a Sunday afternoon. And it was nice to see Abrams producing a movie with Ford after, their history with Regarding Henry, and then knowing that shortly thereafter they would reteam for the 2 Star Wars.
On that wonderful positive note, I think that'll bring a conclusion to this edition of Radio 815. But listen, guys, if you like the show that we put on here for all of you, and you want to write us a comment or a question or whatever, you can email us at radio815@aol.com, or you can reach out to us on X, where we are at JJ Universe 815. If you want to speak to me directly, you can reach out to me on X. That still sounds weird saying it. I'm at Creek Fanatic 88. But Matt, if the folks at home want to try and reach out to you, what will be the best place for them to attempt that?
We can log some movies on letterboxd.com/MDC3000.
All right, guys. So thank you very, very much for listening to this episode of our show. We appreciate all the listeners and all the subscribers that we get. But until next time, as always, we'll talk back soon.
Radio 815 is a Balloonhead Productions presentation in association with Killer Newt Productions.